It helps both large corporations and small businesses with insurance, risk management, and employee benefits using the same values they've held true for over 30 years: knowledge, vision, accountability, and service. More information is at bmbinc.com.
Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Convictions were in the news this week, including a guilty verdict in the road rage death of Joe McKnight and the overturn of a conviction from 38 years ago in which the judge blasted the accused then legal defense. We'll look at those stories as well as Harrah's and the new riverfront. How Republican is Louisiana? Plus discovery of a cheating scandal on standardized tests. And Mobile tests New Orleans patience with billboards about which city came first in celebrating Mardi Gras. We'll look for answers. In the march for us are tonight's Informed Sources: Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources; Tyler Bridges, reporter, The New Orleans Advocate; Marta Jewson, reporter, The Lens; and Michelle Hunter, NOLA.com, The Times-Picayune. We go over to Tyler first, and Harrah's wants to build another hotel. They have one hotel already, but they want to build another one, and they're going to need legislative approval for this, right?
Right. Since November, they have been quietly meeting with elected officials and business leaders to line up support. As he's mentioned, they do want to build a second hotel that would be actually on the casino site. The existing hotel is just across Poydras Street, and they will need the state legislature's approval to authorize that second hotel. They also want to put in some restaurants, and they'll also need approval to deal with overcome the restrictions on food that are in the existing casino law.
So this hotel would it be larger than the existing one or less rooms?
Be a little smaller. The existing one is 450 rooms, and under state law, that is the cap. They cannot build more, so that is one of the changes they want. They want to build an extra 340 rooms, 24 stories.
And Tyler, if people are trying to envision where this hotel would be, if you picture Harrah's and if you picture the riverside entrance to the hotel, it would be in front of that, across the street, or in that area right there?
Yeah, it would be right across the street, basically from where the ferry landing is or where the new Four Seasons Hotel is going up in the place of the old World Trade Center.
So it's where folks can pull up for valet parking right now, if you want to get your mind on exactly where it is. That whole area is large enough to construct a 24-story building there?
That's what they say, and as I said, they have been quietly meeting with legislators and business leaders. If your older viewers will remember, I covered the legalization of gambling 25 years ago, and they had to overcome the opposition of the Restaurant Association and also the Hotel and Lodging Association that were fearful if you build a traditional casino with a big hotel and all sorts of restaurants, people would come to gamble and they would stay there. They wouldn't go out into the French Quarter and otherwise. So that's why the original restriction was no hotel at all. Then after Harrah's went bankrupt, the temporary casino went bankrupt, the law was changed at Harrah's request, so they were allowed to build the one hotel they've got up so far, but that's again across the street with a 450-room limit. So now they're seeking an additional change in the law to be able to build a second hotel. And the Harrah's officials are very quick to note that they are not seeking an expansion of the gambling space. That would be much more controversial to get through the legislature.
But I think what they found out about New Orleans is that people who come here to gamble aren't going to just gamble if they're in New Orleans, unless they're really an obsessed high roller or something. Like, supposedly the Saks across the street does better than most Saks does because of people who go to the casino, who go there after. And if you're that close to the French Quarter, you're going to want to go to the French Quarter. And so it could be that the casino is showing that it's kind of a leader in terms of getting people, to the rest of the tourist area.
Well, that's what the hope would be, and that's how it would actually ultimately benefit the economies if it's visitors coming into town and spending not only money that they lose in the casino, but they go to the Saks and spend money in the French Quarter, Bourbon Street, et cetera.
So what so far has been the reaction, like from other hotels, particularly Four Seasons? It's going to be right across the street now from where Harrah's is planning to build, and then also restaurants. That's additional competition, is it not?
It is. The Restaurant Association is signaling that they are not opposed, and it's too early to know where the Hotel and Lodging Association is. But there are 25,000 rooms in that area right now, and this will be an extra 340 if it's approved by the legislature. And so it could simply be that they'd say, hey, there's enough to go around.
So is Harrah's perhaps looking at this also as a revenue boost for itself? Does the money that it's making from gaming, does that need to sort of maybe be reinforced a little bit? Well,
the surprise is, I talked to some industry leaders that they are not seeking to expand the gambling space. And it may be that they just can't, they don't think they're going to really make any more money by doing that. So that the way they can make more money is to build that extra hotel, because they are pretty much at capacity right now. They give away a lot of rooms to other hotels. And I guess they think they could make more money from the restaurants as well. But clearly they expect to make more money. They're saying that the state and city would receive more tax revenue from it as well.
Well, the grand model of the entire gambling industry is Las Vegas. And Las Vegas couldn't rely just on people in the casinos. And so it's all the auxiliary things, including the hotels, to which you can attract high rollers who go into your casino, and including the restaurants and including entertainment. That becomes all part of the package. You can't do it just on gambling alone.
And what's happening in Las Vegas is that non-gambling activity is becoming more and more important. And so it looks like the Harrah's wants to move some more in that direction, where you have, they're calling it a luxury hotel and all these sorts of things, great world-class restaurants. Although New Orleans has no shortage of great restaurants already, right? But so they would be moving in that direction of offering more than just the gambling.
So let's say they get legislative approval, and right now there's some legislators that you had quoted in your piece seem to be supportive of it. What about the city? What say-so does the city have?
Yeah, the city has to approve any design changes, building permits. That would not be, I don't think, a major problem, but it would be potentially an opportunity for the city to get a little more money out of Harrah's.
The city's going to prove it, because they're going to look at it and they're going to see jobs and income. And they may have some comments to make on the design and things like that, but it's something a city government wants.
So when do you think that this would be resolved? I mean, if it does happen, when does Harrah's plan on beginning this, if all of the approvals are indeed given?
Yeah, so the first step is they need a legislative approval during the legislative session that begins on March 12th, and then obviously, they would need permits and all that other sort of stuff. And that can take time. There's hotels that people thought were going to be going up that haven't, including the Four Seasons. So these things can get delayed, so it could be hard to predict exactly when something like that would open.
Okay, thanks a lot, Tyler. Let's go on over to Michelle right now. And there was a story this week of a conviction that was overturned of a man who had been convicted of rape from an incident that happened in 1979. He's been in prison for 38 years, and now, the judge basically vacated that conviction this week.
Right. That's Malcolm Alexander. He is 58 years old from Avondale. He was convicted in a 1979 rape of a woman at an antique store on Whitney Avenue in unincorporated Gretna. He was convicted in December 10th, 1980, and it's a mandatory life sentence, so he was sent away at the age of 20. He had maintained all along that he didn't do it. He constantly wrote these motions asking the district attorney's office to help with appeals, asking for evidence to be tested. I think in 1996 he reached out to the Innocence Project and asked them for help in DNA testing. When the Innocence Project reached out to the clerk of court and the Jefferson Parish District Attorney's Office, they were told that all of the evidence in this case had been destroyed accidentally. So the Innocence Project was forced to kind of close the case because there was no evidence to test. But he still continued to write these applications for post-conviction help. He was undeterred, the Innocence Project said. And so in 2013, his lawyer said a miracle happened. The Jefferson Parish Sheriff's Office located 3 hairs that had been collected from the crime scene, and DNA testing was conducted, and they determined that the 3 hairs came from the same person, but they belonged neither to the victim or to Mr. Alexander. And so that kick-started the process again for post-conviction relief. Now, the application that they filed focused on Alexander's attorney, a man named Joseph Tosh. They said that he had received ineffective assistance of counsel. Basically, his lawyer wasn't very good. In that one-day trial, his lawyer didn't give opening statements and didn't question the identification of Mr. Alexander. It was a cross-racial identification, and the woman who was the victim in the case didn't immediately identify him. She had viewed hundreds of photos for several months, and I think it occurred in November, and by March they showed her a lineup that just happened to have Mr. Alexander's face in it. And she said, I think that might be him. It was a tentative identification. And so in an in-person identification, she was still kind of not sure, and his attorney never brought that up. And so
as you said, it was a one-day trial for a life sentence.
Right, one-day trial. And he was found guilty and sent off. And he always maintained that he was innocent, and now he's released.
And of course, the DNA, you know, back then there was no DNA testing. Now the DNA has helped freed him. Right, right. And also the DA dropped the charges against him.
Right, the DA agreed to dismiss the indictment altogether. He agreed that in a written statement, Paul Koenig's office said that that there definitely had been ineffective assistance of counsel, that he didn't get a fair trial as constitutional was his right.
And so he was released this week to family there waiting for him. Right. What was his reaction?
His son Malcolm was only 2 years old when he went away. So Malcolm was there, and Malcolm's son Malcolm, who was 20, the same age that Malcolm Alexander was when he went away. They were all waiting. His mother was there, Mandra Alexander. She's 82 years old, and I can't forget what she said in court. You know, it just shows that no matter how old you get, you'll always be your mother's child. She told the attorneys from the Innocence Project, "Thank you so much for getting my child out of here, out of that place. He had been there for so long," and she was in tears. And it was just really moving. He seemed very patient, though. I mean, if I were on the verge of being released from prison after 37 years, I don't think that I'd be sitting in the box the way he was, just calmly smiling at his relatives and nodding and saying, "I'll be back in a minute."
Maybe he learned enormous patience in prison, right?
And that really points out the need for good defense.
Right. Emily Maw from the Innocence Project New Orleans pointed out afterwards that this is just another reason, it's a lesson that Louisiana needs to learn, that they need to better fund public defenders, and that if you continue overdoing, you know, stacking this many cases on public defenders, you'll continue to have Malcolm Alexanders. They just won't get adequate defenses.
But we don't know that Joseph Tosh was indeed a public defender at that point.
We don't know. I've got to assume. We don't know at the time, but I've got to assume. But he was permanently disbarred in 1999 for just, apparently he had like 63 different charges against him, and the Supreme Court just disbarred him. It was all kinds of things. He didn't keep in contact with his clients. He didn't return money to them. He didn't perform certain tasks for them. He wasn't overseeing employees that weren't lawyers. So,
okay, very interesting case. Thanks a lot, Michelle. We're going to go over now to Marta, and you did a story for The Lens about some standardized test just discrepancies that basically have led to the dismissal of 4 educators at the school where this occurred.
Right, so the State Department realized last fall that there were some irregularities that had occurred at Singleton Charter School, which is run by the Dryads YMCA in Central City. And those first irregularities they noticed were that there were an unusually high number of answers that had been changed from wrong to right on an exam. So they go through an electronic monitoring process, and the state will flag exams if they hit over 4 standard deviations of change. One exam, for example, had 25 answers changed from wrong to right, so that's an obvious red flag. And then as they kept looking into the test results at Singleton, they found out that a lot of students had received extra help on exams, which you're allowed to do if you have the correct special education paperwork, but the school couldn't prove that these students deserved that help, and so they also avoided accommodations. It's called accommodations.
Right.
So they also avoided some exams there.
So that comes up to what, how many tests?
In total, 165 students were affected. So some of them had all their exams voided, and some had 1.
So when those exams are voided, I mean, how does it then impact the child in terms of, do they have to retake these exams, or it's just never done
The
again?
child doesn't have to retake the exam, but how it does affect the child, I guess, as a whole and the school is that those tests aren't counted in the school's school performance score, which the state gives out every year.
So what's to be done to try to prevent this? Is there any monitoring that goes on when the children are taking the test?
Depending on the district, some schools do have monitors in the classroom. The Recovery School District, what they've done in the past is they've hired monitors to come in for the schools that are up for renewal, charter renewal or extension. And then after cheating was found at Landry Walker a few years ago, other charters just volunteered to have test monitors in their classrooms.
And this school is unusual in that it's operated by the Dryad Street Y, which has long been a very active community center in the community. But I'm not familiar with anybody, any institution like that operating a school.
Correct. But in New Orleans, most charter boards are solely charter boards and not run by another organization.
And Dryad is slated to also run Mahalia Jackson School Elementary, is that correct?
Right. So the school district, Orleans Parish School Board, voted to close Mahalia Jackson School, but they wanted to keep open the health clinic and the Head Start program that were there. So they wanted a charter organization to come and run the facility. The Dryads Y was awarded that contract, and they were the only applicant to want to take over the school, and the Dryads Y was going to move some of their Singleton students over to that site.
So seeing these discrepancies, irregularities, the board took action. Is that correct? And they dismissed?
Right.
Four educators were dismissed?
Well, 4 educators were dismissed, and this comes in the wake of these discrepancies. The board didn't necessarily say outright
the state board,
that
right?
this was
The
for.
state board?
No, the Dryads
the
YMCA
Dryads.
is
Oh, the Dryads,
nonprofit
okay.
And the charter board.
And the CEO is also resigning.
Oh, okay. Now, we should say that the attorney for those that were dismissed, they have done nothing wrong. They really just didn't have any due process.
Correct. He says that they have not had a fair hearing, which it sounds like they will receive in front of the Dryads Y board, although I'm not sure when.
Okay. All right, Marta. Thank you so much for reporting on that. Errol, okay, now we're having a little war of words with the city of Mobile over who came first.
Yeah, every Mardi Gras this question comes up, and I kind of dread it because it's complicated to explain, and like usually you have like 30 seconds to explain it, and so it's difficulty, and so I try to avoid it, but this year Mobile brought it up by putting up these billboards.
You better respond to them then.
Yeah, China and New Orleans, so those became like fighting words, and so if you forgive me, I've tried to create a metaphor, okay? Right. And if you imagine a long time ago that a wind blew like this acorn to this plot of land, and from that acorn this little tree grew, and then one day that tree dropped an acorn and a bird came and took that acorn and brought it to another place. And that acorn germinated, and from that a tree grew. But the tree that grew from that second acorn was better than the one at the first place. And the reason it was better because the environment was better, the soil was better, there were more people around. It was just a happier, better place for trees to grow. And so, and that's kind of what happened, is that Mobile was the first acorn. Something happened in 1830 that this group started on New Year's night called the Cowbellians that would have a parade. And they did it for New Year's night for several years, and then they moved to Mardi Gras. Over time, some of the Cowbellians, some of them, moved to New Orleans, and in 1857, some of the Cowbellians were part of a group, including some New Orleanians, who started a parade called Comus. And so they introduced their expertise, some of the costumes and their design, into creating the crew of Comus. Comus paraded in 1857. Now, in both cities, there had been miscellaneous Mardi Gras things that happened, but Comus was really the beginning of an organized Mardi Gras activity in New Orleans and really in North America. This was like the beginning, the first step, because Comus was the template for all that followed. It created the word crew. It started the type of parade with the floats. It did all those kind of things. And from Comus, every parade that exists today, every parade in New Orleans, every one of them really owes its roots back to Comus. And so ultimately what would happen is that Mobile was responsible for the creation of Comus, at least some of its people were, but Comus was responsible for the creation of everything else that followed, okay, for the evolution of the Mardi Gras. And so there would probably not be a Mobile Mardi Gras were it not for Comus, but there wouldn't be a Comus probably without the expertise from some of the Mobile people. So they were like both mother of each other in a sense. But it really took New Orleans, it took a place like a big port city like New Orleans for this idea of an organized carnival to flourish. It would have never developed in Mobile the way it developed in New Orleans, and it would never have gone national or international the way it developed in New Orleans.
And as the mayor said, the mayor of New Orleans, Mitch Landrieu, said in his tweet response to the mayor of Mobile, Well, maybe you were first, but we perfected it. And indeed, we have.
Oh, absolutely. And like the Mobile Mardi Gras today is pretty much an imitation of the New Orleans Mardi Gras. They call their parades crews. They use the same colors. They use pretty much a lot of the same music. They have king cakes. There's one float builder in New Orleans, the same guy who builds the Proteus and Chaos Parade, also builds like 6 parades in Mobile. And so it is really the New Orleans expertise that is going to Mobile back as it was in the beginning, where some people from Mobile helped here.
We have the answer. There you have it, from the informed source of Mardi Gras history.
But the short answer, if you're trying to decide where to go to New Orleans. Okay,
You have a lot of fun there.
Do you think it'd be hard to convince our viewers?
Okay, thanks a lot. Over to Michelle. And the Joe McKnight case, there was a verdict found of manslaughter charge against Ronald Gasser. He had been charged with second-degree murder, and this is all involving road rage.
Yeah, it was a very controversial case. For folks that don't remember, on December 1st, 2016, Ronald Gasser was accused of shooting former NFL player Joe McKnight at a Terrytown intersection following this 5-mile tit-for-tat mutual road rage chase that apparently started on the Crescent City connection and ended at this intersection. Ronald Gasser was sitting in the driver's seat of his vehicle when he says that Joe McKnight, who was standing on the passenger side of the car, kind of lunged through the window at him in a way that made him fear for his life, and he shot and killed McKnight. The question before the jury had been whether or not Gasser really feared for his life. Was it a justifiable killing? And Gasser's defense attorney, Matt Getz, had said all along, look, Joe McKnight was the aggressor in this thing. They claimed that he was hopped up on OxyContin and marijuana, and that he was the one that chased Gasser to the intersection and was the aggressor by getting into the vehicle. But prosecutors said that's not true, that Gasser was the one that chased McKnight off the bridge, that Gasser was the one that never stopped, never called 911, never thought that this elevated to a point in which you should ask for authorities or a call for help. Instead, he grabbed his gun in the car, that's what prosecutors said. And then they got to this intersection, and witnesses said they overheard an exchange that sounded as if Gasser had goaded McKnight to get out of the car. You know, McKnight gets out and says, "Oh no, I'm out my car. What are you going to do?"
Just so sad. And also allowed into evidence was an incident that happened in 2006 involving Gasser and road rage.
Right. Ironically, it was like the exact same intersection in Terrytown, in which a man claims that Ronald Gasser followed him into a gas station and punched him after he called a number on the side of Gasser's truck to complain about his driving. And there was a big, back and forth about whether or not that should be allowed, and it eventually was. And the prosecutors say that this just goes to, Gasser's point of view, that he believes that there's always someone else's fault, and that he overreacts to any kind of slight on the road.
So manslaughter conviction carries what kind of sentence?
It's a max of a 40-year sentence, and I believe sentencing is March 15th. They're doing a pre-sentencing investigation, and that's obviously a downgrade from second-degree murder, which is a mandatory life sentence.
Just so sad.
Yes.
And Gasser's attorney says that they will appeal.
They are going to appeal.
They plan to appeal. Okay, Michelle, thanks a lot. Okay, Tyler. In terms of our political affiliations in this state, we have a Democrat for governor, but the rest is really Republican. So how is it looking?
Yeah, I think nationally some people might think now that John Bel Edwards, a Democrat, is living in the governor's mansion, that the state is turning Democrat. But I looked through the numbers, and in fact, since he was elected, or since he took office 2 years ago, the number of registered voters who are Republican has gone up by 75,000. And the number of Democrats, registered Democrats, has gone down by 25,000. And meanwhile, independents have gone up by about 18,000.
But still, there are more Democrats than Republicans registered.
Right. But what's happened is the white Democrats have fled the party, even those who are still registered as Democrats. And so while the state now has a Democratic governor, he has had no coattails at all.
So, I read your piece about this, and you sort of noted that after the Alabama victory, Senate victory of a Democrat in Alabama, that Karen Carter Peterson said, now it's Louisiana's turn, we're going to do the same thing. You don't seem to feel like really the winds are blowing in that direction for the Democrats.
Yeah, Karen Carter Peterson is the chair of the state Democratic Party. There's no evidence that the Democrats are going to be stronger in Louisiana. In fact, there's evidence just the opposite, according to the voter registration figures. And the Democrats are down by 1 in the legislature since John Bel Edwards became governor. And the Democratic Party has always had financial troubles. Now, we just learned that John Bel Edwards has raised $5 million in his first 2 years in office for his reelection in 2 years. So he actually stands a fairly decent chance of winning re-election. But the notion that Democrats could win any of the other statewide elected seats that are now held by Republicans or win back the legislature, which is controlled by the Republicans, that seems very far-fetched.
I was talking to one high-ranking Republican, and privately they'll concede that there is a respect for John Bel Edwards, that they think he's a good man, a dignified man, and that. And I think there's a good chance he would be reelected. But the fact is, he got elected because he was a race against David Vitter. And David Vitter had everything being thrown at him, and so Vitter was probably the one guy he could beat in that race. And the same kind of thing happened in Alabama, too. And so where Democrats have been elected, it's been because of other circumstances kind of slamming their opponent. So it doesn't look good, but somebody like John Bel Edwards at least is in the position to hold on for 2 terms and maybe go somewhere nationally. But yeah, you don't see any big change in trend in Louisiana.
No, not at all.
Or the South, really.
And again, what's happened in Louisiana is really what's happened throughout the South, that the white Democrats have fled the party. And actually, there are now more African-American registered Democrats than white Democrats.
John Bel Edwards still at this point, his poll numbers are favorable, are pretty high still, aren't they?
Yes, yeah, he is a popular governor, and people might have been surprised that when he was elected 2 years ago, again in this Republican state, that he would be doing as well he is so far with the public.
And he faces some challenges with the budget.
And those could be a big problem for him if they don't solve that. It could drag him down by re-election.
But also, the voters are not as obsessed by party labels as the pundits are, or as the other politicians are. I mean, they're the ones who really do that. And so it is easier for a voter who's a Republican to accept a Democrat. You know, so.
All righty, we have to look ahead now.
Okay, New Orleans is celebrating its tricentennial. The big month is going to be May, based on New Orleans getting the charter. The city of San Antonio is also celebrating its tricentennial this year, and its big month is May, because in May, 300 years ago, a church was built called the Alamo. And so based on the Alamo, that they're having their tricentennial, same time that we're having our tricentennial.
Tyler.
Yeah, going back to the governor, the big question right now is whether he will call a special session just after Mardi Gras to deal with the budget problems. He has said he wants a better idea from the House Republican leadership of what they would support on taxes and cuts in spending before he would call that. But I think he's going to have to make a decision within the next week.
Okay, Tyler, thanks. Marta.
When the school board decided to close Mahalia-Jackson, they did so with the big promise that the site was going to continue operating. So hopefully next week, when the schools are back open and running and after Mardi Gras break, we're going to hear from the school board about what is going to happen at that site.
All right. Michelle.
The Jefferson Parish Sheriff's race is underway, and John Fortunato and Joe LaPinto are expected to meet in a public forum at Morning Call in City Park. I believe it's called the Home Defense Foundation. Their forum is going to be at 7 p.m. on February 6th.
Okay, great. Thanks, you guys, for being here, and thank you all for joining us. Of course, we want to see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
The firm of Bowen, McLeod & Britt helps both large corporations and small businesses with insurance, risk management, and employee benefits using the same values they've held true for over 30 years: knowledge, vision, accountability, and service. More information is at bmbinc.com.